Good morning. Looks like everyone is able to join. Thank you all for joining us. California Outdoor Recreation Partnership is really happy to collaborate with the Green Science Policy Institute on this webinar on PFAS, Challenges and Alternatives in Outdoor Products. I'm Lexie Gritlefeld. I'm with California Outdoor Recreation Partnership. For those that don't know, we're a 501c6 nonprofit organization that represents 80 plus outdoor industry companies and organizations on policy advocacy. Earlier this year, we were contacted about a bill moving pretty fast through the California State Assembly called AB 1817. And what that bill did was ban the use of PFAS in textile products starting at the time, January 1, 2024. The bill was then amended to January 1, 2025, but our industry still saw issues with meeting that deadline with supply chain issues and other hurdles to come. And so what happened was we had a few member companies come to us and say that this really impacts their products, especially when it gets to retail sale, because if it's banned by January 1, 2025, there is no way that they can meet it. And so at California Outdoor Recreation Partnership, we formed a coalition. And as the bill started to move through the California State Senate, we met with the Environmental Quality Committee and the author of the bill, Assemblymember Ting, to talk about what amendments we needed to make it fit for our supply chain. And so what we were able to do was get an extreme and extended use amendment for products that see extended use with water, and mostly things for whitewater kayaking, surfing, high altitude mountaineering. And a lot of our companies are able to meet the deadline of January 1, 2025, but there are a few that it just wasn't going to happen. And so we're really grateful to work with Assemblymember Ting's office and get these amendments passed. And the bill did pass the Senate and it was signed by the governor this past month. So that's why we're bringing everyone together so that we can make sure all of our companies are able to hit that deadline and hopefully meet it earlier. And so today we're happy to have Arlene Blum from the Green Science Policy Institute to talk today about the introduction and her work in the past decade on this issue. We have Jeff Turner from Kokatat, who is also on our board of directors, to talk about their issues with supply chain and the phase out of PFAS and their gear. We have Lauren Hood and Kirk Richardson from Keene to talk about how they already have removed PFAS from their shoes. And then we have Marty Mulvihill from Safer Made to talk about alternatives and innovations that companies can use without PFAS. And we'll also have Assemblymember Phil Ting joining us to talk about his legislation and the history and how compliance is going to work. And finally, we'll have Lydia Jall from Green Science Policy Institute to talk about next steps and a one-day workshop they're hosting in Berkeley for all who want to attend. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Arlene to get started on her amazing work on this issue.
Well, thank you, Lexie, so much for inviting us. We are delighted to get a chance to talk to the outdoor industry about some of our favorite chemicals, PFAS. Favorites because they're both so useful and so problematic. But you suggested that I start with my street cred. So I'm not in this picture, but I took it. It's the first all-women's ascent of Denali more than half a century ago. And is there any PFAS in our clothes? No. Yes. What? Not half a century ago. It wasn't patented till the 80s. So anyway, we did climb Denali. And I've climbed a lot more mountains, but my climbing briefly, I'm also a chemist, and in the mid 70s, Bruce Carson, who was the first person to climb grade 6s in Yosemite Valley without pitons. He did some of the hardest climbing. He led Yvonne Chouinard and Royal Robbins up climbs they didn't believe were possible on the faces in Yosemite. And I was with him in India when he fell to his death through a cornice. And I was really depressed. He was an early environmentalist. I wanted to do something for the world. And I heard that the flame retardant in kids' pajamas was likely to be harmful. In those days, all the children in America wearing pajamas where the fabric was 5 or 10% by weight, a flame retardant called tris. And we discovered that when kids wore the pajamas, the tris ended up in their urine like the next day, and it changed DNA, was likely to cause cancer. I thought, oh my gosh, we have to tell the parents of America the story. And then I got invited to, do you all know what mountain this is? It's Mount Everest. And Everest had only been climbed once by Americans then in 1963. This was 76. We were the bicentennial expedition, and I was actually the first American woman to get a chance to try to climb Mount Everest. So I had a big problem. I wanted to write the paper about the tris in kids' pajamas, and I wanted to go to Mount Everest. So I did them both at the same time. So while I was climbing Everest, every night I'd get to camp and I'd write more about the bad flame retardants in kids' pajamas. And this is my high point on Everest, 24.5. The mutants refers to the fact that tris caused mutations in bacteria. And I will say, we all climbed Everest without any PFAS. We were successful, the second American expedition. And I sent my paper by mail runner from base camp on Mount Everest to Kathmandu, and it was published in Science. This was back in 1977. And the title is unusual for scientific papers. It says the main flame retardant in children's pajamas is a mutagen. That means it changes our DNA and should not be used. And in those days, 3 months later, tris-treated pajamas were banned by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. But the kind of tris called brominated was then replaced with chlorinated. And we wrote another paper, and it was removed from pajamas, but continued to be used until recently. After that, in those days, women had not climbed any of the 8,000-meter peaks, so I organized an expedition to Annapurna 1, and we were successful. Again, no PFAS. And finally, this is a mountain called Gritlefeld in India, which is next to Meru. Maybe some of you have seen there's a very dramatic film about climbing Meru. Super hard. Gritlefeld wasn't as hard, but pretty hard, and we made the first descent. Again, no PFAS. So I've written a couple books if you want to learn more, telling these stories and talking about my great adventures in the mountains. I feel really honored to have had these opportunities, and I'm especially happy to talk to the outdoor industry after half a century of really appreciating your products on many, many adventures. But for me, my life's greatest adventure is the one we're on now, which I hope you'll share. So that we're the Green Science Policy Institute. We're scientists who write papers, bring together decision makers from government, business, the nonprofit sector, and academia, and do a lot of communicating with the goal of reducing harm from chemicals. And this such a privilege. It gives us the opportunity to make our products healthier, people healthier, and our whole planet healthier. And so that's what we have been doing. So the problem that we've addressed is there are literally tens of thousands of individual chemicals, and it takes years to do the science, to learn about a chemical, and then the policy change to perhaps prohibit ones that are harmful. And it seems overwhelming when you think of tens of thousands of chemicals. But we came up with the idea of dividing all these tens of thousands of chemicals into 6 classes or families that contain the majority of the harmful chemicals in everyday products. And these are the 6. And you can see number 1 is a very familiar name, PFAS. But there are 5 others. And if you go to a website called 6classes.org, you can watch a 4-minute video on each of the classes. And I'd recommend the 4-minute video on PFAS. But if you want to learn about other harmful things, which unfortunately most of them are found in some outdoor products, you can spend half an hour and really learn the basics on where harmful chemicals are used, why they're used, how to reduce their use, why they're harmful, and we put in a success story each time. So if you take half an hour, you can learn a lot at 6classes.org. So I got particularly interested in PFAS, of course, trekking in the Himalayas. That's where things happen. And this was over 10 years ago, and I was trekking and reading this book, not stain-resistant, non-stick, waterproof, and lethal, The Hidden Dangers of C8, which is a form of PFAS. And I will say, when I finished reading the book and came back to America, I immediately called the Outdoor Industry Association to suggest that we have a conversation around PFAS. But at that point, nobody really wanted to talk to me. So I'm very happy to be talking to you now. So after reading this book and trekking, and I was trekking with a leading scientist from Sweden who studied the chemicals, who told me everything in the book was true and worse, I decided to organize a group of scientists to study PFAS. And just to orient you, PFAS, which is little alphabet soup, stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And what it means is you have a line of carbons surrounded by fluorines. And they are my favorite class of chemicals because they are the best and the worst. As you know, they've got very useful properties, uniquely useful properties of stain and water repellency. And that's because of the strength of the fluorine-carbene bond. It's perhaps the strongest bond in the periodic table. But it also leads to problems because that bond never breaks. And these chemicals are on the planet forever once they're made. And the ones that have been studied have all been found to be quite harmful. So it's a big responsibility to make a harmful chemical that's going to be on the planet forever. I wonder if people have seen Dark Waters. To see a few of you. Have you seen Dark Waters? Maybe not. So it's a great film. It came out just before the pandemic. So unfortunately, not as many people saw it as would have seen it otherwise. It's a story of Rob Bilott, an attorney with incredible persistence, just like a Himalayan mountain climber, who discovered a huge contamination from the production of Teflon in Ohio and West Virginia. And Rob is played by Mark Ruffalo. His wife is Anne Hathaway, and it's really a great film. So I recommend seeing it. From that contamination, a lot of people were sick in this community. Rob filed a lawsuit, got a pretty large amount of money and used it all for health testing of the people who lived in the community. They tested 40,000 people and learned that PFAS can be linked to cancer, high cholesterol, and a whole range of health problems, and that in PFAS is in almost everybody. So the PFAS that was then being used was called C8, 8 carbons surrounded by fluorines. And it was phased out in 2015 because it never broke down, accumulated up the food chain, and was toxic. Unfortunately, the replacement was C6, which you can see looks very similar and is just as persistent, never breaks down, doesn't accumulate as much in people, but accumulates in plants, is being found to be equally toxic, moves faster, and is harder to get out of water. So filtration that takes out the bigger C8, the C6 goes right through. So all in all, C6 is not an improvement over C8, but it was sold that way to manufacturers of many, many products, including the outdoor industry. Saying, well, we don't really know if there's health harm or there isn't health harm, but it turns out that there is just as much as with C8. And in fact, the different PFAS have been found to harm virtually every organ of our bodies, and there are more studies coming out all the time. So this is just once a week for the last while, a few studies showing cancer, diabetes associations, childhood obesity, glioma, whatever that is, lipid outcomes, and at the bottom you can see this one, neurodevelopment, that says associated with increased odds of autism spectrum disorder. So it's really a worrisome class of chemicals. We want them to be used only when they're really essential. So the extent of the problem was found from an EPA study looking at drinking water across the US and finding high levels in originally about 6 million people's drinking water, but as recently what's considered a safe level has been going down. A big chunk of the drinking water in our country is contaminated with PFAS, and this comes, we did a paper tracing back from the contaminated areas to the sources, and it cites where PFAS is made and where products are manufactured with PFAS contribute to the contamination of drinking water, along with military bases, airports, which they use firefighting foam that contains PFAS, and then wastewater treatment plants tend to get PFAS from upstream and concentrate it. So these were led to water contamination. This can be really expensive. Just one example, in Michigan, Wolverine made hush puppy shoes and sprayed the leather with Scotchgard, which was PFOS, and they dumped the scrap in fields where a suburb was made, and the drinking water in that suburb was up to 840 times the health advisory level, and the people in the suburb were having the health effects associated with PFAS. So there were lawsuits. There are lots of lawsuits about PFAS these days, and Wolverine, who made the hush puppies, paid the state of Michigan $69 million, and then they sued 3M, who paid Wolverine $55 million. But really, 3M and the chemical producers knew for a long time, since the 60s, about the harm of PFAS, and they really weren't saying so. They, in my mind, should be responsible that the manufacturers really did not know. Water treatment's expensive. Chemours has a chemical production facility in North Carolina that contaminated the whole Cape Fear River area. For carbon filtration that takes out the long old C8s, $46 million to build a plant, $2.7 million to operate per year. But if you want to take out the C6, a short chain, you need reverse osmosis. And that plant was estimated to be $99 million to build and still $3 million to operate for 25,000 people. So super expensive. So what we believe is that PFAS are problematic, difficult to clean up, and it's much more important to prevent their use by not using them in products. And I'm so glad that the outdoor industry is now moving in this direction, and we really do want to be as helpful as we can. So I'm going to give some success stories. Carpet used to be the greatest source of PFAS exposure for children. They would crawl on the carpet, put their hands in their mouths, and families where carpets were treated with PFAS to clean the carpets were found to have very, very high levels. We actually worked with the carpet industry. They're all in Dalton, Georgia. They came to Berkeley and came to one of our one-day meetings, and we were inviting you all to a similar one-day meeting for the outdoor industry at the end of November. Well, inviting brands, not everyone. But anyway, the carpet industry came. They had all switched to C6. They came in saying, we're using C6 now. It's no problem. And then they heard from a lot of different scientists about the problems with C6. They heard from their big customers that they didn't want any PFAS in their carpeting. And by the end of one day, the carpet industry, and they heard from regulators in California who are planning to list carpets with PFAS as products of concern. This was a couple years before the listing, so this was before there was regulation. But they all, as an industry, decided they would stop the use of all PFAS, and they did within 2 years. They found alternatives. And we knew that our meeting was in 2018. We knew that they had succeeded when Home Depot and Lowe's started advertising that they were going to be selling rugs and carpets without containing any PFAS. And they were able to do that because the carpet industry had 2 years earlier made a decision to phase it out, had found alternatives, and had succeeded. Now, the carpet industry has a small number of companies, and it's not nearly as complex an issue, we realize, as for the outdoor industry with such a diversity of companies. We also wrote a paper a year ago about PFAS in cosmetics. We tested several hundred cosmetics, and about half of them contain PFAS, particularly things like waterproof mascara, foundation, shiny foundation, liquid lipstick, things that are shiny and waterproof. And At that time, actually, the day our paper went online, there were no PFAS and cosmetic bills bipartisan in the US House and Senate, but neither of the bills passed, unfortunately. But at the same time, the manufacturers came to a press conference we had, learned about the problem, started working on removing PFAS. And then this year, just September 30th, here in California, the PFAS-Free Cosmetics Act banned all PFAS from being intentionally added to beauty and personal care products sold in California. And so again, the manufacturers at least started a year or so before regulation. A more recent paper we did looked at school uniforms, and we found high levels of PFAS in all stain-resistant children's uniforms tested, which is a big worry because a third of American children wear uniforms and they're right up against their skin in some cases. And the PFAS could definitely be problematic to their health. But as you know, PFAS was banned in textiles in California, and that would certainly help protect children from PFAS in their school uniforms and other clothing. So our next speaker, who I'm just going to introduce with a little story, will be Keen. And you'll hear more from them, but on their PFAS-free journey, they found PFAS in 101 places in their shoes. And water shoes probably don't need so much PFAS. So 70 places they weren't necessary and they removed them. And then they found replacements for all the others. And they were indeed successful. We tested a lot of different outdoor shoes, and Keen's at that point, this was a year or two ago, the only ones that had no PFAS. So they wrote a green paper, and they're going to share more of those details with you. So if you are interested in PFAS as I am, you might be interested in our website called PFAS Central, where every week we report the most interesting news stories on PFAS, the most important science, and we condense it to just one line, what a paper is saying, to give an overview. Also policy change on PFAS, as well as PFAS meetings, jobs, and our most visited page is our PFAS free page, where we list manufacturers and products of various kinds that do not contain any PFAS. And we hope that many or all of you who are brands, when you succeed in removing PFAS from your products, will get in touch with us and we can add you to our PFAS free list. We made this for communities who've been drinking PFAS treated water, who really wanted to buy products that did not contain PFAS. So we started this page, and we find a lot of people find it interesting. So you can learn more about PFAS and other chemicals of concern and how to reduce harm at greensciencepolicy.org, our website, PFAS Central, focused on PFAS, and then sixclasses.org, where you can watch the 4-minute videos, or just 4 minutes, watch the one on PFAS to learn the basics. And then we have a monthly newsletter about all these chemicals and how to reduce harm. So please consider signing up. Sorry. And then I wanted to mention that we're going to have one of our one-day meetings here at the David Brower Center in UC in Berkeley, on moving to PFAS-free gear while maintaining function and price. Pricing, some of the same speakers as today will be speaking there, and there's a lot of small groups. It'll be a small meeting with a lot of chances to interact, samples of PFAS-free textiles. And if you write Lydia, she'll be ending again, but Lydia at greensciencepolicy.org. Can send more information or write me if you're interested. And as I said, we encourage brands. But I think I have about a minute left, and I want to just share something really interesting. Yesterday, I met Matthias Fossel from Before Surface Technologies, who used to be a chemical manufacturer. He actually sold some of the original PFAS to Levi's and other big companies a long time ago, and then since has been working on alternatives. And as we took a walk and discussed what could be done, he came up with a new idea, which I want to just share with you, which was to build the best products we can without PFAS. Now, this isn't true for everyone. Like Jeff, who's going to speak next, has a product that PFAS seems pretty important for. But most products, remember, we climbed all those mountains without PFAS. Most products can be made without PFAS. And his suggestion was erase PFAS from your brain and then start building your product. To set a new baseline for the industry. And then once products are being made without PFAS, new ideas and innovations will come, and there can be new products that might even be better without PFAS. So maybe giving up PFAS would be a small step backward for some products, but it would be a big step forward for the health of our population and our whole planet, because PFAS is forever. So I hope this gives you some ideas about the chemical and some support for the hard work of moving away from its use. So I will turn this over now to Lauren Hood from Keene. Let me see if I can stop.
Thanks, Arlene. That was really great. I feel like I learned so much already.
Oh, good.
I'm going to kick it off and then I'll pass it over to Kirk. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Hood, the Sustainability Manager at Keene Footwear. And we have Kirk Richardson, who's been doing this work for a long time. So we're just going to take 5 or 10 minutes to talk through what Keene has done to remove PFAS and leave a few minutes for questions. So Keene, as a brand, has a pretty simple but major goal, and that's to create footwear that's 100% free of the most toxic chemicals. And this journey really started back in 2014. We've invested over 11,000 hours, $1.2 million just on this initiative. But that list of chemicals came from the Green Science Policy Institute, and there are 6 classes of the most toxic chemicals. So I'm just going to second what Arlene said, to go watch those videos and, learn about what they have. That was really our starting point. We've now removed 5 of the 6 classes of chemicals, which is really exciting. And we'll talk specifically about PFAS today. And while Kirk's talking, I'll drop a couple links in the chat, but we've published a green paper about what this journey has looked like for Keene. We've encouraged other brands in the footwear space and in the outdoor space to join us on this PFAS-free journey, because we're sort of proof that it can be done. And we're continuing to work on that. The last class of chemicals we're in motion on is solvents, which is a tricky one in footwear. So I'm going to pass it over to Kirk, and he can kind of talk through how we went about that project of removing PFAS.
Thank you, Lauren. And Arlene, thank you for inviting us here today. We could not have done what we have done without the inspiration from people like you and your colleagues at Green Science Policy Institute. We started, like Lauren said, in 2014. And, for a non-chemist on the call, to say it, you need to surround yourself with trustworthy experts. In our case, we picked a guy in Portland, Oregon, because that's where Keene is based. Scott Eccles, who'd been with Nike for years and years and heading up their sustainable chemistry work group. And he was super instrumental in helping us not only compose our RSL, restricted substance list, for those of you who don't know what that is, as well as consulting on the policies, and there's so many bits and pieces to it. I don't want to get lost in the weeds, but I will just say, having him there to guide us in the first year was really core to the success we're now enjoying, many years later. Third-party verification, great labs like Intertech, Bureau Veritas, and SGS, they're still with us today. Random testing, kind of trust but verify, because in footwear, for those of you who don't know it, you typically have 30, 35 different component materials, which are finished products in their own sense, which are then sort of symphonically orchestrated into a final product that you can take up Annapurna, perhaps, at least to base camp. or go for a delightful hike in Kings Canyon or wherever it is that you like to go. So we started on this journey, and then very, very quickly hired our own chemist. He, in this case, a Chinese gentleman scientist from China, who came out of the Intertech laboratories, which we use even to this day. And I would say that was essential, but specific to PFAS, in this demanding to make sure we had no PFAS in any of these ingredients going into the final recipe of a shoe, we screened a ton of it. And then, of course, you need to random test to make sure that the submitted sample, the verified sample, wasn't exchanged when it gets to the factory. And so we have continued to do that throughout the years to validate and verify third-party wise that there are no tricks up anybody's sleeves. The other thing that Arlene touched on, and Lauren, is that there are so many unplanned places in which PFAS is a contaminant. You would never think, if you know anything about shoes, that you'd want it kind of in the third layer of this dogwood sandwich of, mesh, linings, all the way down to something like a toe box reinforcer. I mean, if your face fabric is getting wet on a piece of footwear, and you have, let's say, a urethane waterproof barrier, it's not going to get into a toe box reinforcer. But things like that were contaminated before we started this journey. And so we've had to work back with all of the myriad suppliers who are providing component ingredients to footwear. And, that's why it's taken us a long time. The two most important words that I can share with you this morning probably are precautionary principle. I mean, the whole notion that if you don't need it, don't use it. If you don't want it, don't use it. And so this has kind of been the spirit behind this, is like we've just insisted that people who are going to, sell us something that we do want in our footwear have not contaminated it because they don't want their roll of textiles or their shipment of grommets or shipment of laces to show up with dirt and debris on them from a long journey from someplace to a factory. And, I think we eliminated something like 2/3 of all of our annual consumption of PFAS simply by just using the precautionary principle. I mean, that, and again, the testing to verify that in fact that had been done. But it's been a long journey, and we continue to this day doing all the laboratory testing with the 3 labs I mentioned. And frankly, you have to, although we have 4 of our own factories around the world in the Dominican Republic, the United States of America, and Thailand. That's where we have them. We don't worry so much about our colleagues in those places, but other places that we also source assembled product made from components around the world, in places like Cambodia and Vietnam, we just assume that you can trust, but you have to verify, and you kind of have to assume, unfortunately, that people are maybe pulling a fast one. And so you just have to be vigilant. I mean, we had an example this past year with Wilhelm Textiles coming out of India, where their submit samples 4 times in 2021 passed, and yet assembled product failed. And ultimately, when we had a harsh conversation with them, they said, well, there are no laboratories on earth that you can trust unless they're in Germany, to which I said, as far as I understand, science is science. It doesn't follow time zones. And, it ultimately means you have to dismiss certain suppliers when you get people that are just stubborn and, bullheaded about what they're going to produce and how they're going to place surfactants on textiles that they want to send to you as an article. But, it's some money, and it's definitely some time and vigilance. But in the end, if you care deeply, if you care profoundly about the health of the planet and the people who live here, you don't want people exposed to PFAS in any way, shape, or form. And I go back to Scott Eccles one last time, and I'll kind of leave it open for questions here. I asked Scott Eccles in 2014, I said, Scott, thank you so much for all your help on the RSL. If there's, but being a non-chemist and being slightly overwhelmed by the number of compounds we were trying to screen, I said, if there was one thing you wanted to get out of the footwear manufacturing system more than anything else, what would it be? And he, without pausing or hesitating, he just goes, Kirk, I get rid of para and polyfluorinated alkyl substances. And this guy is, he's a phenomenal partner on our journey, and that's why we picked it, and that's why we've sweated in blood to get rid of it. And I think all the stories and science that Arlene just outlined illustrate how important that it is that we do it, because it has so many deleterious impacts on human and wildlife health and well-being and water. And, I'll stop at this point.
Yeah, that's great, Kirk. I dropped the green paper and our RSL, which is our restricted substance list, in the chat for everyone. So feel free to, that's what Kirk was referencing that we're testing against. Lydia, I'm not sure if we have time for questions or if we should keep it moving. Or
we should probably keep it moving, but we can have questions.
Okay, well, I'll monitor the chat if people want to drop questions for us in the chat. Thanks, Kirk. I'm going to pass to Jeff Turner now.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Kirk. Really appreciate the work you guys have done. And Arlene, you got street cred.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh my God.
Really appreciate hearing your story, and thank you so much for the work you've been doing for obviously a very long time. So that's great. Just for everyone know, I'm Jeff Turner. I am the Director of Sales at Kokatat, and I'm also a board member at the California Outdoor Recreation Partnership. I think the interesting thing for us is that Kokatat has been working on PFAS elimination as just one component of a long-term sustainability strategy. And we've been on and had our focus on PFAS for probably the last 7 or 8 years. The thing that is interesting is we're also we're one of the oldest Gore-Tex licensees in the outdoor business. Kokatat's been working with Gore since before they launched the laminate materials, and we also use other components, other fabric components, and so forth throughout our line. Interesting for me was I became aware of the legislation in California the same time Lexie did. We were discussing it at our board meetings, and at that time there was a date that was going to be a real challenge for us to meet, because as close as we are to a company like Gore or many of other suppliers, Kokatat is, if you don't know, Kokatat is a manufacturer of technical apparel primarily focused in the paddle sports community on the consumer side of our business. We're a big brand in a very, very small category. So we are, in the net result of that is we're a small company. When we became aware of this legislation that at the time was going to have a shutdown in about 1.5 years at this point, it was 24. We were faced with a decision at that point. If that legislation held, we would not be able to manufacture in California. We would have to move to another state or shut the business down. It was that could be that injurious for the company. I became pretty active with the coalition we established on having conversation with Member Ting's office and Maria, who's on the call here. You'll get to see a little later. And it was really very encouraging for me to see how engaged our legislators were in this discussion. We had many discussions with many senators and assembly members and contributors to the program. And I want to be clear, it was never an intent of Kokatat or anyone on our coalition to work against the bill. We were all in support of the bill. CORP was very clearly from the get-go in support of this legislation. But we really were trying to explain to the government that this was a process that had very challenging impacts through the supply chain, and that the initial dates of elimination were just not possible. And fortunately, people listened. We have a no program now where PFAS elimination starts on the 1st of January in 2025. And that will be for, I guess I'll just call general use garments. It will include many outdoor industry garments, many other garments in other sectors of the apparel industry. And we were able to also negotiate an extension for what are referred to in the bill as extreme and extended use products. That's really the largest percentage of products that Kokatat is manufacturing. We make dry suits for paddle sports, dry suits, dry tops, dry pants, all those things to keep people dry. We make those out of a couple of different branded fabrics or component branded fabrics. Gore is certainly one of our biggest contributors. We also manufacture similar kinds of products, immersion protection products for the government, utilizing many similar kinds of products, dry suits and so forth, for special forces and so on. And we manufacture products for chemical and biological protection, for warfighters and so forth. Fortunately, the bill had an exclusion for any government apparel products, but we were able to get that for certainly our outdoor industry folks. We were able to get that extended extreme extension put in place till 1/1/28. Kokatat is absolutely on plan now to achieve that goal. We will be, our general splashwear and so forth will be on par and will be PFAS free by the 1/1/25 deadline. And with luck, and we're focused on it, we're committed to doing it. Virtually all of our products by 1/1/28, particularly the ones that are used in a more extended or extreme category. The thing that struck me and the thing that I wanted to bring to this discussion was even a company like us we control everything. We control our entire supply chain. We have little opportunity to influence because we're not ordering at a very high volume. So it's, I really thank companies like Keen for their focus. They can drive, their economies are there, they can drive a little more change. But certainly other companies, whether it be Patagonia, the North Face, the component suppliers, W.L. Gore and so forth, we really have to kind of wait, unfortunately. And I think that this legislation actually is going to, obviously, it's going to drive the achievement of a deadline. The thing that concerns me mostly is that people are not aware of it. And I think that's one of the reasons we at CORP wanted to do this seminar, was we want to start the process of broadening the awareness of the impact of the new laws in California, as well as open up the discussion to see it's happening across the country. There are similar kinds of laws, not exactly the same in Maine and New York at this point. There's a lot of discussion going on in many different states across the country, in Canada and in Europe. But the reality is that this PFAS elimination has to happen. I completely agree with Arlene, and great, we've got that kind of voice into this organization. But the impacts of, let's talk about the 1/1/25 deadline. that's going to have a very direct impact to all retailers who do business or sell products into California. And the reality is that the retailers, or who are many smaller businesses or smaller brands like Kokatat, will have no choice but to make this happen. And I'm most concerned. We did have a retail participation in our coalition. I'm most concerned that we need to be able to broaden the exposure and get a message out there so that a retailer, for instance, a retailer located in California, a small independent retailer, need to understand that by the end of 24, they have to turn all of their inventory, whether it be footwear, jackets, pants. They cannot, on 1/1/25, they cannot be selling any general use product through their doors, or they will be in violation of the law. I'm going to work very hard with our retailers and the people, the voice that we can provide over the next year and a half to help them with that. We're also as a company going to help manage and make sure the products we're selling as soon as possible are PFAS free. But I think that's really the key point I wanted to bring in this discussion and others that I'll be involved with, is that the message needs to get out so that people know that this is a reality and something that we're all going to have to deal with. And thank you to Maria and Member Ting for giving us that deadline, because as Arlene pointed out, this has been around for quite a long time. And the onus is on us now to get this fixed and cleared up as going forward. That was the extent of the message that I wanted to bring into this group, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have during the following few minutes left in this discussion. And thank you very much. And I guess I'm passing it on to Marty. Maybe Lexie, you want to jump in? I'm passing to Marty. Thanks, Marty.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. And thanks for the commitment to getting it out of that exciting gear that you're making. And thank you to the work that Keen's done. And Arlene has always been an inspiration for the work that we do here at Safer Made. So Safer Made, we're an early stage venture capital fund. We invest in companies that eliminate hazardous chemicals in consumer products. I'm a chemist by training. I used to run, I helped start the UC Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry. So I'm a chemist. I get why people use perfluorinated compounds. They are very unique in the chemical world. Unfortunately, part of what makes them unique is that the carbon-fluorine bond, being one of the strongest in nature, also doesn't have a way to break down in nature. So one of the reasons why we're concerned about this whole class of chemicals, not just one member of the class, is that they persist for so long in the environment and have been found in so many different ecosystems, harming not only human health, but also ecosystem health. So as an investment fund, we've been looking for alternatives to perfluorinated chemistry, not just in textile and apparel, but actually across a range of sectors. And of the 10 companies that we've invested in to date, actually 4 of them touch on this issue of perfluorinated chemicals. It's important to note right here that it's not one chemical that's going to replace the whole class of PFAS. It's not even one class of chemicals that's going to replace the chemical PFAS chemicals. Rather, in each sector that we've worked in, we've had to find tailored solutions that meet the functional properties that those products are looking for without the harm that has come along with PFAS. So first I'll start with a couple of examples that aren't in textile and apparel. And the first is a compostable food service company. And this actually relates to Arlene's story about sectors coming together to recognize that adding things like perfluorinated chemistry to the pulp of a food service ware is not only increasing exposure to perfluorinated materials, but it flies in the face of the idea of a compostable product that breaks down after its use, because perfluorinated chemistry doesn't break down. And in fact, after a similar meeting to the one that Arlene's holding later this year, focused on PFAS in food service, the standard, so in this case, it wasn't a regulatory change, but it was a change in the standard body, the BPI, standard changed to ban PFAS. And now not only our company, Repurpose, but all companies that have compostable claims that meet the BPI standard have had to remove PFAS from their food service materials. So that's one that we've worked on quite a lot over the years. We also have a company called P2 Sciences that makes bio-based chemicals that get rid of petroleum-based products in our personal care products. In that case, believe it or not, there are certain conditioners and personal care products that use perfluorinated chemistry in them. And we were happy to see that a large company, Unilever-backed company, actually came to P2 because their solution allowed them to remove a perfluorinated acrylate from a line of personal care products. And that's one of the things that I'd like to point out, which is that by looking for safer alternatives, by taking the time and effort, because it is, as Jeff and the folks from Keene shared with us, it is a lot of effort to change. I don't want to sugarcoat that, but taking the effort to change often comes with co-benefits. You know, not only switching from a hazardous chemical, but moving to something that's bio-based or maybe uses less water in its application. If you're gonna undertake the effort to redesign one of your products, to change the materials that go into it, it really should be viewed as an opportunity to innovate around the materials and functional space. And that's certainly what we've seen with P2. The other two companies that we've invested in actually directly relate to the outdoor industry. So one is a fabric finishing company, Green Theme Technologies, and the other is Dimpora, which is a producer of an alternative to the perfluorinated membranes often found in breathable waterproof fabrics. But I won't want to spend too much time on them. I want to talk about the fact that while we were looking for those companies, we found that there are a number of suppliers. So I want to highlight both on the fabric finishing side as well as on the breathable membrane side, just some of the many suppliers we've run into who do have alternatives to the perfluorinated chemistry. So on the fabric finishing side, we see folks using natural waxes and oils. So you can go to a bio-based solution. People using hydrocarbons, many of which can actually attach to the fabric in ways that are strong and bring some of the durability. I know that durability has been an issue with some of the alternatives, but there are ways around that. Similarly, polyurethane and isocyanate-based linkers are one of the common alternatives to these fabric finishing. And lastly, silicones have found their place into fabric finishing. So you can find these types of chemicals from traditional suppliers, large chemical companies like Dystar and Huntsman. They sell the perfluorinated chemistry, but they also sell non-fluorinated chemistry. This is where you have to do your diligence and make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting. But there are non-fluorinated versions available from both companies. Nikwax has been using waxes for many years, and they're another supplier to the industry. There are also specialty mills who are already selling fabric, if that's more comfortable than going all the way back to the chemical supplier. So Scholler and Haiku, as well as Sam Wu, are all suppliers, large mills that supply the outdoor industry that have fabrics that are made with finishing that does not contain perfluorinated chemistry. Again, you have to do your homework, but they both use fluorinated chemistry and non-fluorinated chemistry, but you can find alternatives already available today, and these are mainstream suppliers. In addition to that, you have the companies like the ones that we work with, which are a little bit more, they're smaller, they're earlier in their journey, but sometimes they offer additional benefits. They also take additional work because they're not already in your supply chain. So examples there include Beyond Surface Technologies, which has a mostly bio-based solution that is kind of in development. Also have Green Theme Technologies, which has a version that is very durable and can be applied without using any water. So reduces the impact of a lot of finishing where there's pollution back into the water stream. So they have a waterless solution that's quite durable that they call Impel. Similarly, on the breathable membrane side, so that was all suppliers on the finishing. So that's what gives you the beading on the surface of a fabric. What gives you that true waterproofness with a little bit of breathability is a membrane that goes behind it. It's almost always plastic, either bio-based or petroleum-based. The traditional product has been the PTFE, the perfluorinated membrane, but we now see polyolefin. So there's polyethylene-based ones from BenQ. There's polypropylene ones from Trenchant Textiles, and PU alternatives from Sympatex, which has been making these membranes for years. And then you have electrospun membranes from folks like Polartec and others, which again use some of these petroleum plastics to spin. And then, you know, the company that we've invested in, Dimpora, has a template technology. So they create the pores in any plastic. So you can use bio-based plastics, or you can use a resin that matches your fabric type to make a monomaterial type thing. So I hope that in the few minutes that I've had here, I have the list that I gave you here, and you can find additional suppliers on the PFAS Central website. So I've been working with Arlene and Arlene's scientists to share all of the information that I just kind of ran through here of these various suppliers. And so you can find that on PFAS Central today. And I think Lydia put the link there earlier. But what I want to say is, since we've worked on this both from the brand side, where we've had, you know, brand like Repurpose, who's had to find alternatives, as well as the supplier side with folks like P2, Dimpora, and GTT, what's really important here is that it is an effort. This isn't a drop-in replacement. This isn't a magic chemical that comes at the same cost that you can use exactly the same way as you do today with no change. It's going to take effort. And what does that effort look like? That effort looks like partnership within the supply chain. That effort looks like follow-up testing, like we heard from Keen. And that effort looks like an openness to redefining what the standard for performance is, rather than what we've seen in the past, which is letting the incumbent solution providers define the performance standard. Make sure you're working with your customers to find the proper performance standard that's going to give you what you're looking for. So what I hope you've taken away from this, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. I see that Assemblymember Ting has joined us, is that it is absolutely possible today, with some effort, to find durable, effective coatings, many times with additional performance or sustainability advantages, if you're willing to put in the work with your supply chain. I'm glad that the timeline is something that was worked on between Assemblymember Ting and the industry, because it gives time to explore these options and hopefully come up with something that is better for human health, better for ecosystem resilience, and better for the world. So if you want help contacting some of these alternative companies, happy to reach out to me, and you can find us at safermade.net. And also GSPI, like I said, has on their PFAS Central webpage a number of the companies that I mentioned in passing here today. So with that, I hope to see some of you in Berkeley in November, and good luck on your journey toward PFAS-free outdoor apparel.
Hi, everybody. It's great to agree here with the Green Policy Institute and also with CORP. Apologies for running a little bit late. So thanks to Marty for being flexible and jumping in there. I was asked to just talk a little about AB 1817 and also just take some questions. We really appreciate all of you working very closely with us on this piece of legislation. Happy to see the governor sign it. And I know that there are some questions in terms of implementation. As you know, we did, AB 17 did ban the use of PFAS in textiles, including clothing, indoor furniture, and shoes by 2025. However, we did have an exemption till 2028 for outdoor apparel used in severe wet conditions. So we thought that that was in particular important, just to give many of you a little bit more runway to transition, especially for some of the products that are really used for skiing or camping in the rain, a variety of clothes. I know that I own some of that clothing as well for myself. So this legislation was really a continuation of the PFAS work that I've been doing to ensure that we are less dependent on that forever chemical. One of the major dangers in particular was around the impact on drinking water. We've unfortunately had a number of our drinking water wells get contaminated with PFAS, not due to intentions, but I think oftentimes people unintentionally polluted that. And unfortunately, once those water wells were polluted, it makes it very, very difficult to use that water as for drinking water in the future. And at a time when we're facing drought, it's a complete disaster where we have water that we cannot use to drink. So, from an industry point of view, I know that there were a number of different questions around exclusions and around, timelines. In particular, there were some, what I would say exclusions, or I would say clarifications of items that this bill does not apply to. So like textiles and cars, boats, planes, filtration media and filtration products, textile articles used in laboratory analysis or testing, architectural fabrics, textiles used exclusively to the military, and then single-use paper hygiene products. So those are some of the exclusions. And in particular, I know that there's been some questions around what exactly is, outdoor apparel. I know that we had felt that outdoor apparel was something that would be in particular used for very, very wet conditions, or wet conditions where you'd be immersed in water or in snow in particular. So if you had something that was just sort of very lightly water resistant that you wear out in the rain just for walking around town, versus when you go to Mammoth or Tahoe or wherever you're skiing, that's where we would, I think, have those would be two different types of products. We purposely did not put very stringent enforcement in there. We didn't want it to be, heavy-handed. So at this point, there's no fine in there, which is also typical of what times we would do with bills. And there's also no, in particular, department mechanism to say, hey, if companies aren't abiding, then in particular, we would, come after them. That's not the point of the bill. I think the point of the bill is really to provide a timeline. We know that many retailers are already moving in this direction, moving very quickly in this direction. So really the main enforcement vehicle would be the attorney generals, district attorneys, county councils, or city attorneys that would, in particular, do the enforcement. So I know that's a very quick overview. I'd rather just see if there's questions out there that we can kind of answer. I also have Maria Morales, who is my staff, who staffed the bill, did a great job on the bill, also here to answer any questions from any particular manufacturers or retailers.
In the chat, there was one question in the chat that Marie answered in the chat, but you might want to say something about it.
Says it's a ski bib sold at REI, made for resort skiing conditions, considered outdoor apparel for extreme extended wet conditions. I believe so. I'm just going to double check with Maria.
Yes, this is Maria. So it would be considered out. It would only benefit from the extension through 2028 if it's not marketed at the general consumer, meaning if it's marketed at experts who would use that at an REI.
Meaning marketed towards marketed for skiing, you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Like it's not marketed for, hey, here's a raincoat to walk around town. I don't know why anybody would walk around town in a ski bib, but again, I live in San Francisco, so we see all sorts of things. Governor vetoed PFAS reporting requirement. Does this mean there's no requirement for the I don't know about the PFAS reporting requirement that the governor vetoed. I don't know if Maria, if you know about that.
Yeah, so AB 1817 does not contain a reporting requirement. It does, however, contain a reporting requirement for the apparel that benefits from the 2028 extension. So outdoor apparel that gets that 3-year extension does have to label products to notify consumers that they contain PFAS through that 3-year extension. But there's no other reporting requirement to any department or agency in this bill.
Yeah, Kelvin just asked me to reiterate the issue around fines and enforcement. So just to reiterate, there is no penalty in the bill. Quite often with these kinds of bills, we will put a penalty that often escalates. We identify a department in particular for collecting those penalties and those fees, and also for doing the specific enforcement. We purposely did not, because we didn't want to be, I think we saw this as much more of a aspirational bill, where we know the industry was already moving this way. And given the feedback, so many folks have already decided on their own to go this way. So that we thought just by codifying this and codifying the deadlines, that would be enough. So at this point, excuse me, at this point, it's only the Attorney General, District Attorney, County Council, or City Attorneys that would be in charge of enforcing the bill. So it's very different than how other bills or how that might be typically handled in other bills.
King, my name is Jeff Turner. We've talked before. I just wonder, on the issue of enforcement, as you just related, how does this typically work in the future? In the future, as we get beyond the deadlines and so forth, is there a likelihood that this will be taken up for some discussion of enforcement?
I would only say yes if there was a significant non-compliance. So if we felt like there was a lot of non-compliance, then yes, it might be taken up.
And we might see that non-compliance by potential customers, consumers, whatever, pointing it out to the people they need to speak to within the government and so forth. Is that how
absolutely.
you would?
They could do it, or we have a lot of advocacy groups who care a lot about this work. They might hear as well. I think that would be more likely to happen, where you'd have certain folks talk to different advocacy organizations who they know are involved in PFAS, and they would probably be the first ones to flag it, in my opinion. But again, you wouldn't see anything until after, obviously, 2025 or 2028. Right. So it's quite a gives us a couple of years to really move in this direction.
Sure. Thank you very much.
There was a question about Prop 65.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how Prop 65 would interface with this reporting question.
That was my question, Phil. And I guess my question is, how do those intersect? I mean, the new AB 1817 and Prop 65 in terms of like just in REI, for example, reporting to their consumer on the floor of the San Mateo REI or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it wouldn't be, say REI wouldn't have to report. It would, the bill does not say REI just does a simple disclosure on the floor of REI that, oh yeah, there's products here being sold. They would have to individually label those products they got an extension for. So between 2025 or starting 2026 through 2028, they would have to individually label those products that contain PFAS that were marketed for extreme outdoor gear. Yeah. Okay.
So, I might add.
So just to be clear, so for those folks who don't know Prop 65, oftentimes you see this little label in the window that, hey, coming in here could cause you cancer or whatever, cause you some, there are chemicals, and you see it everywhere. So it's kind of been, in my opinion, got to the point where it's fairly ineffective, because as long as you kind of have that blanket disclosure, I guess in some ways it insulates you from actually doing what the proposition intended you to do, which was to sort of make sure that you're actually telling people what may cause them harm. I think what our bill was very focused on textiles, and so REI could not just have a little sticker in their window. They would actually have to individually label the textiles that they were selling, that they were selling between the years of 2026 and 2028. And then, of course, after 2028, they would not be allowed to sell textiles with that chemical.
Thank you.
This is Arlene. I did have a question about communication. We've heard that there are many small outdoor companies, and I think the big ones know about this and have been following it and have been working. But I think REI said they have 1,000 or more people who sell to them, and hopefully they'll tell them all. But I wondered, is there any effort when a bill like this is passed? Is there some mechanism by which it is communicated with those upon whom it would have impact?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not. I mean, obviously, we do communication, but I only communicate within my own district, not necessarily across the state. We do partly rely on industry organizations like CORP to sort of get the word out. Obviously, the advocates who we worked with we'll do our best to get the word out. But quite often with all these laws, you rely on the media as well as word of mouth to get the word out. And I'd say that's very common for all of our bills.
Well, thanks to CORE and hopefully the Outdoor Industry Association and REI, that they will get the word out.
Yeah,
it's so important.
Yeah, and if any companies need assistance, Maria just put her email in there just to delineate, what the bill does, what it doesn't do, so you can, let people know exactly what they have to comply with and what they don't. So we're happy to absolutely assist with that.
Well, I do have to thank you, because I would say that I was so amazed, having been interested in PFAS for so long, where to have a bill like yours, prohibiting the use of the entire class is a huge step forward. So we really want to thank you for your vision and your leadership. Thank
you. I think Maria deserves a lion's share of the credit. I was actually very skeptical we could get the bill done in 1 year. It kind of screamed a 2-year bill to me, but we were very thankful, I think, building on the momentum that we had last year. But I think also, I think so many of the core members who are here who've already decided to move in that direction. That's what made it, I think, very easy. When I first started doing PFAS, I'd say 5 years ago, when you had very few companies talking about it, it was sort of, PFAS is what? Like, what is that? And, I don't need to tell people what PFAS is anymore. And I think that so many companies have already moved in that direction. You see so many, consumer food companies, which is what I did last year. And then this year with clothing companies, they've already said, hey, this is no brainer. We've already done it. So the fact that, we're not making an entire market move, but the market's already moved in that direction, I think we're providing a stiff breeze. That's what I'd say, and just kind of blowing the sails. So we really appreciate everybody for all the work and working with us very closely. And frankly, I think being reasonable, I think telling us what could be done, telling us what couldn't be done, so we could really fashion a bill. I think oftentimes when you're working with industry, it's a straight no, and you really can't develop very good legislation with a straight no, because then you're a little bit kind of just grasping in the dark at what the right timing is and the right exemptions are. And I think working with many of the folks on this Zoom was great, because they gave us really good feedback as to what we needed to do, what we should do. And I think we got a really good piece of legislation. Doesn't mean that I think it's not going to need to get updated, say, in 5 years, but I feel very proud of the work that we did this last year. Thank you to everybody for all their help.
Thank you, Assemblymember. We really appreciate and respect your work on this. It's really an important issue to all of us. So now we're going to open up to Q&A with all the panelists. So I'll be on with Marty. And if anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat or feel free to speak up if you're able to. I have a question I'll start us out with. As an avid outdoor user, I have a lot of products with Nick Wax. And Marty, do all Nick Wax products not have PFAS in them?
Well, trust but verify, right? The The good news is that for a long time, the majority of their products have not had PFAS in them. They've been using the waxes, both petroleum-based and others for many years. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but they're one of the larger ones that actually has had a solution for many more years than others. You know, that's what I would say is they're a good starting place, because they have relied just on waterproofing from waxes.
Awesome.
There seems to be a little silence. Maybe I'll just clear up a little misunderstanding about Prop 65. So Prop 65 is administered by OEHA, the Office of Environmental Health and Hazards Assessment, and their mandate is if chemicals are strongly associated with cancer or reproductive harm, if they're going to be used in products in California, there has to be a label. So where PFAS overlaps with this is the two old PFAS, the C8s, those long chain ones called PFOA, PFOA, and PFOS, very confusing alphabet soup. Those two are listed on Prop 65. Now, those have not been manufactured by American manufacturers since 2015. However, they have continued to be manufactured in China. We did an experiment where we took some air measurements in the closet of an outdoor company who kindly let us do that. I will not mention their name because it's very kind of them to let us measure the air in their closet. And we discovered a lot of PFAS, including the old banned C8 in the closet air, which means the products did have that. Sometimes it can just be an impurity, or it came from China and it had the long chains. So things with those old long chains could be listed by Prop 65. And the way that's regulated is through citizen lawsuits. And it turns out there are a lot of law firms who make a lot of money testing products. And if they find a listed product under Prop 65, they'll sue the company. And so companies are worried about things that are listed because obviously that they don't want to have lawsuits, and they often didn't know they had the product. You know, a problem that you'll all encounter is the complexity of the supply chain. So companies all the time think they don't have PFAS in their products, and they do. You know, we do feel that the manufacturers are kind of caught in the middle between the chemical industry that wants to continue selling these harmful petrochemicals and people in the world that don't need to be exposed. So anyway, so Prop 65 is useful just for the old ones, and it has serious enforcement. There are lots of law firms who make a lot of money enforcing Prop 65.
And I think OEHA added the class this year, just in 2022.
That would be amazing. Nice.
OEHA's been thinking about adding the whole class. I don't know when that starts, so I'm no expert, but they've been talking about adding, you know, poly and perfluorinated substances. Should ask OEHA, but it is, yeah. I've always thought that Prop 65 would be better if they told you what compound made them list it, rather than just putting a Prop 65 warning. But that's my feedback for Assemblymember or whoever else.
Well,
to your comment, Arlene, about the complexity of supply chains, one of the things that has, let's say, a downside and an upside to local for local or localization of your supply chain in terms of transportation, greenhouse gas emissions. I see it all the time where people are arguing for localization, which I get, but the issue is you're opening the door to, you know, expanding the number of places you're getting things, and you may have inadequate on the ground truthing to verify that a surfactant like PFAS is not being applied to an article you're trying to, you know, use to build a finished product with. And so I think that's an area. And another one that people don't think about because they get so obsessed about the product they're creating is the packaging. And we went through a verification this past year with the Natural Resources Defense Council on this. And we went from an A+ to an A- in our scorecard because they found contamination in some of the cardboard or the a surfactant that was placed on the cardboard on a shoebox. And so we've added obviously everything in packaging to our PFAS policy list. And it's just, I think the one thing, I don't know if we've used this word on this call, is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. And it's this unfortunate gift with purchase from your vendors, your supply chain component people, that are processing all manner of ingredient from thread. You don't think about thread, but it's so anyway. I had a question for Marty, and I'm sorry if I'm switching the conversation slightly, but Marty, we have used also, and I don't know if you mentioned them, or maybe you did, Rudolf Chemie from Germany. They have I think they call it a dendritic, but it's sort of the notion of kind of the shape of leaves, these chemical compounds that are safe, effective, and relatively affordable. There's a bit of a premium, but we found that to be an option as well.
Excellent. And I hope they're on PFAS Central. I think they are.
I don't know.
Sure. But yeah, no, there are a number of suppliers and to your point, a lot of them use polymers in novel ways. So that dendritic construction gives you a high surface area, helps repel water. That's where the creativity and beauty of chemistry really is, that there's multiple ways to get to any end function. Yep. And that's why there really are alternatives out there today. I'm glad you shared which one Keen was using. I didn't know.
Yeah, I think it's called, I can't think of their model name is like Eco something. The other thing is, you're thinking about kind of the whole precautionary principle, and this is really for brands, not scientists. But if you're using a waterproof barrier on a product you're selling that's waterproof, whether it's in footwear or apparel or wherever the heck it might be, if you're using that, who cares about whether or not the face fabric after several hours in a downpour gets wet? You're not wet inside. You have this waterproof barrier. So it's just silly. I guess my whole idea on PFAS is it's past its use date. There's already, relatively competent alternatives, and Marty knows them extraordinarily well. I know them pretty well, but we're just over consuming on this notion that you have to have beaded water droplets flying off your jacket or you're going to get wet. You're not going to get wet. You're going to get wet from your perspiration, as Arlene, I think, mentioned on one of her alpine adventures, not from the outside in, it's inside out.
Well, in the beginning, we called Gore-Tex upside down cloth.
Yeah,
because we got wet from sweat and the rain came, and that was in the beginning.
That's it.
So we didn't need it on our expeditions. But just to go back to Prop 65, Marty, I wish that were true, that they had regulated the whole class. I go hiking with Lauren Zeiss, who leads OEHA, and I've been encouraging that for years. But I'm pretty sure they haven't, because once OEHA regulates the whole class, that is a hard stop for everybody. That's not like the nice, gentle legislation from Ting moving things forward. That is, if you have PFAS in your product, there's going to be a lawyer buying your product and suing you. So that would be huge if that were to happen. And OEHA has hugely high scientific standards before they can regulate. I don't think they can do the whole class, but everybody would know with a huge shock if they did, because that would mean tomorrow they had to stop selling it, or they would get sued. I just want to put in a word. There's that long deadline that people need, and there are products like Jeff's where Gore-Tex PFAS does seem essential, but they are minuscule compared to the uses. We have found with all our 6 classes, about 2/3 of the use is due to marketing with no real value, just like Keene found. 2/3 of the places there was no value. I would just imagine, I haven't looked, but in the products of people in CORP, probably 2/3 of it is marketing, and that can be removed immediately. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage people to do that quickly, because those chemicals, you know, if you handle them, your workers handle them, the public handle them, they're being exposed. And it doesn't mean you're going to get those health conditions, but across the population, it harms the health of everybody. So I think the unessential uses could be taken away right away. And then the difficult search, as you said, very hard work for the alternatives. But I mean, do remember we climbed Annapurna and Everest and Brigham Pond next to Meru without any PFAS, any Gore-Tex. And I don't think people need it for bird watching, you know, dog walking, and so many of the uses where it is being used. So I really hope people will start immediately, not waiting for 2 years or 5 years, but remove immediately all the unessential uses, and then begins the hard work. And for some people, there won't be any essential uses when they really start looking. And I just want to repeat what Matthias said yesterday, that if we imagine that PFAS had never been there and start thinking about our products differently, we could make different sorts of products perhaps that would, with innovation, become just as good or even better. So it's a chance to open our minds to new ways of doing things for many members of the outdoor industry. And I mean, so the idea that they want to drop in replacement or that they have to have Gore-Tex, that's probably true for the smallest number of people. You know, that they don't have to have Gore-Tex. There are lots of alternatives, and the best one is none at all. So I'm going to do my little sermon here.
Precautionary principle.
Right.
I want to make sure we give Lydia a chance to speak.
Yeah,
no worries. As we're coming to near the end, so I'll put Lydia on.
Thanks, Lexie. So yeah, I hope everyone learned a lot today. And just another reminder that scientists like myself at Green Science Policy, as well as Lexie and others at CORP, Marty from Safer Made put his email in the chat, so did Maria from Ting's office. We're all here to help you on your journey away from PFAS. And part of that next step that we hope you'll join us for is a workshop that we're holding at the David Brower Center in Berkeley on November 30th. This is a workshop geared towards brands who are in the process of removing PFAS, regardless of where you are in that stage. So we'll be giving some more information on PFAS itself and why you want to move away from it, hopefully as fast as possible, even before the legislation forces you to. We'll have manufacturers panels where many of you could participate and talk to others, both about the challenges and solutions for functional gear without PFAS. We'll also be having small and large group discussions around this issue and moving towards PFAS-free products. Marty will be joining us again, as well as others familiar with the alternatives and how to best transition your products. And lastly, we'll be having a PFAS Alternatives Expo where you can meet some representatives of some of these alternatives and talk to them about their options. So if anyone's interested in learning more, our space is filling up quickly, so please contact me as soon as you can to learn more about this. Again, any brands that sell outdoor products, we're looking to have you join us in Berkeley. So I'll put my email in the chat and please get in contact with me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Lydia. And lastly, I just want to thank Lydia and Arlene for contacting us about putting this webinar on. We are looking at doing a PFAS webinar, and honestly, they brought in even more insight than we were looking for. That was so helpful. And I want to thank Kirk and Lauren from Keene for being here, Jeff Turner from our board, Assemblymember Ting, and of course, Marty Mulvihill, which I think will be a great resource at Safer Made. And so if you have any questions or want to connect with anyone after this and didn't get their contact info, please feel free to reach out to me. It's Lexie, Lexie at californiaoutdoor.org. I'm putting it in the chat now. And we will get this recording up on YouTube so that you can share it with your colleagues. We're really hoping to reach retailers with this information as soon as possible, because this is going to have a huge impact on them. I know a lot of companies are able to do a reverse supply chain, but we know smaller companies don't have that capacity. So if you can think of any small businesses or retailers that you want to connect this information to, please forward on the YouTube video or have them reach out to me. And thank you for everyone for joining at California Outdoor Recreation Partnership. We're grateful we were able to come to a solution on this, and look forward to further working with the industry on it. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.